we're going to spend a few minutes talking about absolute and relative ethics. And this is information that you're going to need to know for your assignment on absolute and relative ethics, together with some of your own research on the topic. So, absolute, the term absolute means any theory in which the rules are absolute or unchanging, universal. It When we talk about relative, it's a theory in something is judged in relation to something else and therefore open to change. So that makes it subjective. Absolute laws or rules of morality will never change. And another way of putting that is that they're, as I said, they're objective. And objective means that I'm not bringing in any personal opinions or bias. So the rules that I work with are rules that would apply to anybody else and that anyone else would rationally come up with. So, for example, I may use reason to determine, as we said before, that it's wrong to lie. So, someone who follows ethics would think that it's always wrong to lie in any situation, in any culture. So, it's, whether I'm lying about your health or whether I'm lying about the fact that you look great in that dress or that the Easter Bunny exists, they're all wrong. So, everything, it's just an absolute. An absolutist can never think it's right to lie. And there was a famous Kant, so remember Kant from what we discussed before, he had a famous example of absolutism. And that is that a murderer knocks on your door and asks you where your friend is. He's looking for your friend. And you know that your friend is hiding in the house. So an absolutist would say, would tell the murderer where the friend is, even though you know what's going to happen. So as Kant would say in this situation, that if I lied to the murderer and said my friend isn't there, and then in some strange coincidence, the friend left the house and was met in the street by the murderer who then killed him, I would be morally accountable for the murder because I'd lied. So that's kind of an absolutist. Relative morality is the opposite. So we know that absolute means unchanging and universal. Relative is open to change. What it means is that different cultures can believe different things, and people across different time periods may believe different things about morality. It can also mean that each individual person has their own theory of morality that's different to those around them. Relative, as I said before, is subjective, and it can change depending on personal opinions, and so it can be biased. Think about euthanasia. Euthanasia is acceptable in some cultures, in some countries, whereas in others, it's not. Cannibalism, an acceptable practice in some cultures, in some countries, and not in others. So, we may think that eating a person is morally wrong, but in some cultures, it is an appropriate practice. So relativism states that at different times in different societies across different time frames, people have different views on morality, which were right for them at the time, right for their culture, then it's okay, it's moral. So morality, therefore, is what is right and what is wrong, but it can be different across times or places. So this can have some unfavorable implications because, can a society make moral progress, or can we ever view another country as morally wrong or morally corrupt? You have to be accepting of everything and everyone, which, isn't necessarily a bad thing. One positive is that it makes us become more tolerant of other societies. You can't look down on people if what they're doing is deemed morally appropriate for them. If our moral rules work for us and theirs work for them, then there's nothing wrong with that. We can't judge them as being morally corrupt as their morals work for them, and it leads possibly to a more moral society. Deontology, as we talked about before, is an absolute theory. You might have thought that it sounded familiar. So like absolute, something is your duty. Once you've worked out what your duty is, you're obliged to perform it. no matter what the circumstances may be. This means it's absolute and it's unchanging and it's universal. Utilitarianism is a relative theory. When we decide something based on its consequences, then the best course of action, and therefore considered to be morally right, may change. This means it can't be absolute because it can change and is therefore relative. So those two should have sounded somewhat familiar. So there, as you can see, there's strengths and weaknesses to each type of these theories, relative and absolute, and neither one has really provided a strong enough account of morality to be compelling enough for every member of society to adopt it. So what you'll have to do is make an argument for one or the other, not gray area in between, in your first assignment. So here I just gave you a sampling of ethical challenges in healthcare, and we'll probably talk about some of these as we go along. We've got there's lots of ethical issues in healthcare. One of the ones that you see a lot is conflicts of interest. So whether it's pharmaceutical companies or other healthcare providers or whoever it is, sometimes they give incentives or freebies for prescribing their drugs, for example. That can be a challenge. So is it ethically okay to accept an incentive to prescribe a certain medication? Here's another one that can be an issue. These rural hospitals, they don't have a lot of funding. They serve many people who are uninsured, and uninsured are able to receive services through the emergency room, but now the hospital can't afford to remain open. So what's going to happen to all of these people who are no longer going to have access to any health care? So that can be a challenge, an ethical challenge in healthcare. Equal treatment of the many versus the special or very important person of treatment. So healthcare providers to the stars are leaving more public practice because of the income potential for working with these higher income people. So it makes it more difficult for people who have low income to be able to access the services. Vulnerable populations, unable to make their own healthcare decisions. So, what do we do with people who have mental illness? Very young, very old, the services that they both require, and are they capable of making decisions? Healthcare worker burnout is a huge issue. So, particularly people who work in settings where patients have poor prognoses or have challenging treatment requirements. Makes it more difficult for people to remain in those settings. However, those people are still entitled to deserve the services that they receive. So how do we help those people be able to get those services? And then another one is specialists who give referring providers fees or kickbacks for referrals. So you have a healthcare plan that requires you to get a referral from your primary care physician, but this primary care physician gets kickbacks from specific specialists. So that's who gets all the referrals. Is that ethical practice? So these are just some of the things that, are issues out in practice, and we'll come across a lot more as the semester goes along. So I'm giving you a challenge, and this is not something that you need to send to me in writing or anything. However, I will we'll probably discuss this. We'll look at what some of your options are when we get together in our face-to-face meeting. So you're an airplane pilot and your plane has experienced engine failure. The nearest airport is miles away and there's no way you could make it. You believe you can set your plane down in a town which is close by, and there's a school in town with a flat roof. So in your mind, that's the safest place to land the plane. It's a Friday afternoon, so there shouldn't be too many people in the school. So you head in that direction. When you get very close, you see there's a construction crew working on top of the roof. If you try to land on the roof, you will surely kill the crew of 4 because there's no time for them to get out of the way. If you don't land on the roof of the school, it's too late to adjust the controls and the plane will crash into the ground, likely killing everyone on board. So think about, how would a consequentialist, a utilitarianist, and a deontologist respond to this situation? Think about that, and we'll talk about it next week. All right, that's it for week 1. have a good week, and I look forward to meeting you all. Or those of you I know, I look forward to seeing you.